Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for watching this video. For those of you who don't know, my name is Kelsey Hazard, and I am the founder and president of Secular Pro-Life. And I am joined by my wonderful partners in crime, the co-leaders of Secular Pro-Life, Monica Snyder and Terrisa Bukovanak. And we are here because we have a very special, exciting announcement about the future of Secular Pro-Life and the direction that we are going in. We were founded as an organization in 2009. We have been doing this work for a dozen years, if you can believe that. And that entire time, we have been a volunteer organization. You know, we've given the one-off payment for blog authorship and things like that, but we have not had any paid staff, and we have just really operated on everyone putting in their free time. And we have found that as we have grown, that is no longer sustainable. And for Secular Pro-Life to really accomplish what needs to be accomplished in this new phase, we need to have a full-time paid staff, which is a really scary but also fantastic problem to have. And I am so thrilled to let you all know that we have obtained the donor support that we need to make that a reality. And we have hired our very first paid staff person, our executive director, and it is none other than Monica Snyder.
Yay!
So, thank you, Monica, for stepping up into this role. This is and you're the best person I can think of for the job. Monica has been involved in Secular Pro-Life almost from the beginning. So Monica, for those people who may not know you and your involvement, tell me, how did you find Secular Pro-Life? How did you end up here?
Facebook, actually. I joined Facebook like late 2006, early 2007. I joined a group that had a discussion board, which they used to have, a pro-life group. And I wandered onto there and started arguing about abortion basically almost every day for the better part of a year. With the same couple of dozen people. One of those people was Kelsey. And so that was throughout, I think, 2007 and into 2008. And at some point in 2009, she reached out to me. She knew I was an agnostic. And she said, hey, I'm creating a group for secular pro-life people. Do you want to help me out? And I said, sure, thinking it would basically be still arguing online. And in the beginning,
fair, there was still some of that.
It did kind of start that way.
More.
Yeah. And I think in the first year or so, that's all I really did. And I think I designed a couple bumper stickers, and then you started a blog. I looked it up, and my first blog post was in late 2010. I started blogging kind of regularly. And so I was involved in that capacity. And then when Kelsey had to study for the bar exam, because if you didn't know, she's a great attorney, I ran the blog in the summer of 2012, which includes having posts almost every weekday the entire summer. Looking back on it now, it's kind of crazy. But at the time, I had no children. I was not that long out of college. And for those of you who've gone to college, when you're in school, you're busy all the time. There's no off time. You always could be studying. But when you get out and you get a job, even if I was working 40, 50 hours a week, but it felt like I had all this free time because when I was off, I was off. And so I spent most of that free time doing secular pro-life stuff because I love it. And so I also started doing presentations at college campuses. We started referring to me as our West Coast coordinator. I presented at UC San Francisco, Stanford, Berkeley, and kind of dipping my toes in that way. And then I think it just ballooned from there. So that's how I met Kelsey, and Terrisa came along a little bit later.
Right. So Terrisa, why don't you share about that, your experiences with the lovely Monica Snyder?
Yes. Well, I met Monica under totally different circumstances, but in real life, I was a Starbucks store manager for many years. Still loyal to the brand. Sorry, guys. It's the best. But Monica was, you were going to school at Berkeley, or she had just finished school at Berkeley?
I was trying to get into school at Berkeley.
Okay. She was in between schooling and wanted a job. And she came in and applied for a job, and I hired her. We worked together for several months, and then I moved on in my career, and we stayed friends on Facebook. And I had always had, not always, but at a certain point in my life, I started to have doubts about my pro-choice position. But I kept it pretty under wraps because I'm an atheist and I'm a big time leftist, and I was living in San Francisco, and I just really didn't see myself fitting into the pro-life movement at all. And I definitely did not call myself pro-life, but I was interested in the topic. And but then I saw Monica arguing with someone online on a page called Secular Pro-Life. And I was like, wait a minute. And this is years later. I mean, this was like maybe 2 or 3 years after Monica and I had stopped working together. And I just was like, wow, she's involved in this organization. And so I started following Secular Pro-Life and also getting into fights with people, arguments, constructive arguments, not so constructive back then. That is one of the great lessons that Monica had taught me early on, was how critical it was to listen and to have really productive conversations online with people. And I'm so grateful for that foundation, because now I pretty much just yell at people through a megaphone all the time. But it just wouldn't be as successful if I didn't know how to have a respectful and fact-based conversation with people online, thanks to my interactions with Monica. But eventually she, and I mean, obviously those of you who know her know what an authority she is on so many issues, especially this particular one. And Monica just has a way of explaining things and breaking things down to where you can just totally understand where she's coming from, and that she understands where you're coming from. Had a major impact on me and my ability, and finding Secular Pro-Life and meeting Monica in that capacity helped me to come out of the shadows and say, look, I'm also pro-life. And you know, when you're getting in arguments with people online, everyone can see that, like, especially on Facebook, it pops up in everyone's feed. So I was really kind of, you know, outing myself at that point. But I'm really grateful for Monica for kind of, you know, dragging me in that way, although she didn't really know about it at the time. But at some point I did come to an event physically, and I remember seeing the surprise on her face.
I got to tell this part. So the Walk for Life West Coast asked Secular Pro-Life to be one of the speakers. And I asked Kelsey if she wanted to do it. And she was like, you live there. Why wouldn't you do it? I was like, okay, fine.
I'm on the other side of the country. You are our West Coast coordinator.
I actually
in
love
California, but at the time, yeah.
I love talking in front of people. That's not the issue. And this crowd is somewhere between 30 and 50,000. I don't have a problem with that. I just wasn't used to, I had kept pretty good barrier between my activism and the rest of my life. And if I did this, like, the barrier is gone. And so, but Kelsey thought I should do it. And so I put together a speech. And as I'm ascending the stairs to speak to this, what for me is a massively huge crowd, all of a sudden down below, I see my former Starbucks manager come up and be like, hey, good luck. And I'm like, what are you doing here? But thank you. I had no idea. I had no idea. And so I gave the speech, and afterwards we met up, and she was telling me what you just said about seeing things on Facebook and getting more involved. And she's an atheist. And I was like, you should join us, which has been one of the best things that has ever happened to us and the pro-life movement, I think. And for me personally, specifically, it's been hugely influential because, so that was 2014. I did the SFLA conference the next day. I start to meet people in person in California. I met Josh Brahm, one of my best friends to this day. And I started to go to more California events. And so again, it's ramping up slowly from the humble origins of an online debate board. But the thing that really kicked it for me was, fast forward several years, now Terrisa is this full-time fire-breathing, constant pro-life activist. And she contacts me and says, I'm putting together a pro-life conference in Berkeley, and I would like you to present. And to be frank, I felt resistant because at this point I have kids. I'm the primary breadwinner for my family. My life is just a lot more complicated than it was when I ran the blog in 2012. But Teresa's putting together an entire conference. You have any idea how much work that is? A lot more work than putting together one single presentation. So if Teresa's putting together an entire conference, I can put together one presentation. But then I really took it to 11. I spent between 50 and 60 hours creating this 30-minute presentation from scratch. And that was the presentation, Deconstructing 3 Pro-Choice Myths. And this was a big turning point for me for 2 reasons. The first one was I saw how much people want this content. So the idea of the presentation was that It's very fact-based. I had pages of citations I printed out to give to people, and I wanted it to be something anyone could access regardless of their philosophical views or value systems or political ideology. You could be very, very pro-choice and still recognize, for example, that most abortions after 21 weeks are not done because of medical emergencies. You can have any kind of worldview and recognize that as a fact if I can show you the data. And so I was trying to make this very fact-based, just the facts, Jack kind of presentation. And I found that people really responded to it. I gave the presentation with great success. People invited me to give it at other conferences. People invited me to give it to private groups. And they were very interested in talking about expanding it. And to be frank, I credit Terrisa with that because she's the one who's like, you have to come present. And I was like, okay, fine.
And I hate to interrupt, but if you're going to be at the Rehumanize conference in just a couple of weeks, you will hear a version of that presentation. So.
Yes, updated for 2021. Yes.
Yes.
So the first thing I found was that there's a lot of interest in this kind of fact-based content. And this is important because I have a bachelor's in chemical biology. I have a master's in forensic science. And I'm very interested in peer-reviewed research and in, like you said, translating it, getting the central themes so that people can access it. That was the first part. But the second part was I realized I can't really do this on a strictly volunteer basis anymore because I loved making the presentation. I woke up at 6 a.m. thinking of things I could add to the presentation, right? But I basically took over a week off work to do it. And I'm the primary breadwinner for my family. And it wasn't really, in that regard, it wasn't really okay. And we fixed it later. But Terrisa was the one who was like, ask for a stipend. And I had never done that before. It's been 9 years of helping SPL for free because we love this work and we want as many people as possible to access it. We don't want to put up any barriers, but it was getting to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And she suggests this. And so I started asking people for a stipend and found to my delight, there was no problem. Everybody was like, oh yeah, of course. Happy to support your work. And that was a revelation to me, not to Terrisa, she already knew, but to me, I was like, you know what? There might be a way as I get older, my life gets more complicated. There might be a way that I can still keep doing this work that I love so much. And so I started continuing SPL and paying more attention to our donors. We have been very fortunate. We have had donors come to us pretty much the whole time we've existed without us doing almost any solicitation and just saying, we love you, we appreciate you, here's our donation. And that's been enough to get us by because we've been working on a volunteer basis anyway. But I started being more proactive saying, listen, this is the work I want to do, but I can't do it, for free anymore. And everybody that I've talked to has been like, absolutely happy to help. And that was also a revelation. I wasn't at that point like, okay, let's go full time, but it was a step in that direction. And I feel like that was, I credit Terrisa with pushing me to get more involved. So that was a big turning point for me as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. I am just so thrilled about all of this. I mean, first of all, Kelsey starting the organization, but really the fact that we're seeing it through to this point where we've hired you, a full-time executive director. Like, this is what we need. Our opposition is working full-time against us and has been decades, and now we are just really stepping it up. We are going to inspire so many people. We are going to equip so many people with secular scientific knowledge on this topic, and I know that it is going to have a lasting impact on the movement and hopefully be one of the key elements that brings us to victory.
Absolutely. And now that we are looking at the Dobbs case in the Supreme Court and the tantalizing possibility that Roe v. Wade will be reversed, that is not the end. That is the beginning. That is a new and possibly even more difficult phase for our movement of saving babies on the state and local level, because it is going to be a state by state, a city by city battle against an abortion industry that will be, fighting by the skin of its teeth to hang on and continue to be profitable. So it's going to be extremely intense. And if ever there were a time to go full time, this is it.
Absolutely. And I think we have good reason to believe that if Dobbs goes the way a lot of us are hoping, and it becomes more of a state by state battle, the states that will have our work cut out for us are going to be the ones with a more secular population generally.
Absolutely.
And so I see a role for us there.
So that's a great transition. Yeah, as much as I've enjoyed this trip down memory lane, I'm sure our supporters want to know, what are your plans and visions for your for your new role as our executive director.
Of course. So broadly speaking, I want to work toward our mission, and our mission is multi-part. For those who don't know, we want to advance secular arguments against abortion. We want to create space for non-religious pro-lifers, especially pro-life agnostics and atheists specifically, but really anyone who doesn't see themselves adhering to particular religious practices but wants to be involved in anti-abortion work. We want space for them. And we want to build interfaith coalitions with religious pro-lifers who also want to advance secular arguments. We like to say, we don't actually care what you believe, religious or non-religious. Whatever you believe is fine if you're with us on fighting abortion and you want to advance secular arguments. So that's our mission. And the ways that I want to expand it are primarily to expand our visibility hugely and then to expand our content. And the visibility could be having the volunteers or myself and the time to go to many more in-person events. It could be expanding our reach through social media and potentially putting together ad campaigns for the content we already have. It could be creating merchandise or giveaways, t-shirts or pins or protest signs or anything that explicitly says, I'm an atheist and I'm against abortion, or any other non-traditional demographic. And the visibility thing is very important for three audiences. First audience is pro-choice people and people on the fence. We want them to understand anyone can be pro-life. Anybody. We don't care what your religion is. We don't care what your political ideology is. We want you to be against abortion. That's our thing. Second, it's for, and this is where my heart really is, it's for sort of the closeted non-traditional pro-lifers. And we know you're out there. And we've had... Exactly. And the entire time we've existed, and Kelsey can attest to this from the beginning, we have people come to us repeatedly and say, I thought I was the only one.
Oh my goodness. I would get especially in the beginning, so many emails. Thank you for starting this organization. I thought I was the only one. I think we're getting fewer of those emails because our visibility has increased, because it's no longer so novel, and that's a sign of success. But we've got to keep pushing to make sure that everyone knows this is not a question of separation of church and state. This is a matter of life and death, and abortion is a human rights violation. You can recognize that no matter what your faith background might be.
Exactly. And I want to make sure that to the extent we have people who are interested but they feel like they don't see a place, they can sit with us, come sit with us. And the best way to do that is to increase our visibility. When we post things occasionally to our social media talking specifically about being atheist, that's kind of like sending up a flare every now and then, be like, hey, over here if you want a place to go. So that's the second group. And then the final group is what I would consider the more traditional pro-lifers, more traditionally conservative and Christian, because I find that all I have to do when I go to an event is say, hi, I'm Monica and I'm an atheist. And it changes the way people speak about their work, and not in some kind of tense, hostile way, just in the subtle ways that you change when you're thinking about your audience differently. It's happened to me before where I'll give a presentation and before I give it, someone will come up to me and say, just so you know, I'm pro-choice, but curious. And that will change my cadence, my level of sarcasm, my demeanor, because I'm being more conscientious about who my audience really is. And if you're just there, if you just show up, it can affect the way people talk about this. It can affect the level of inclusivity that we give. So visibility is huge, and I really want to increase that. And then the other thing is I do want to increase content output. So the myths presentation, which is close to my heart, I want to do more like that. I want to take that and make it much more digestible. It is on YouTube right now as like a 30-minute video, and people have watched it, but I think you could make it more accessible by breaking it up and starting with one concept at a time. But there's other stuff too, like we're very familiar with the Turnaway study, and people have seen the famous statistic that the Turnaway study claims 99% of women who have gotten abortions don't regret it 5 years later. But what fewer people have heard is that the same exact study found that 96% of women who sought abortions and were denied them 5 years later also didn't regret it. The vast majority of them birthed and raised their children and are happy they have them. And when you put those stats side by side, it's a completely different context, and yet you only hear about one of them. And the only reason I know about the second one is because I was reading the entire Turnaway study and I found it. So there's a lot more research out there like that I want to dig into it and see exactly what it says, and then make sure people, especially pro-life activists, but everyone, realizes the full context of this. And the best way I can do that is to have the time. So the way to increase the visibility, increase the content output specifically is I want to organize our volunteers. We have been very fortunate. Volunteers come to us over the years. Can I help you write the blog post? Can I help you make graphics? Can I help you with the back end with the website? And that's wonderful, but we have not been able to properly use their time and talent because we're always scrambling to keep things going. Now that I'm full-time, I could focus and be more organized. I've already gotten back to a whole bunch of them. Be like, hey, I do remember you. Please come back over here for a second. And so trying to put this team together that I think could be very formidable. Some of them have amazing credentials. And they can help me with content output. They can help me with visibility. I can't do everything myself, but I think I could put together a team that can be quite useful. And then also, like I said, organizing our donors. Up till now, we just receive what we receive through the ether and we appreciate it. But I think I could be a lot more proactive to establish a stable enough financial base that I can keep doing this job and hopefully eventually expand it. We can hire additional people so that we can take over the whole world. Not really, but you know what I'm saying?
All right. Well, on that note, I think that says it all. If you would like to support our work in this new exciting chapter, if you are interested in being a volunteer, can contact Monica directly. Her email address is now monica@secularprolife.org. And if you are so inclined to contribute financially, you can do that at secularprolife.org/donate or on our Facebook page. Thank you all so much for your support over the last 12 years. And thank you for the support that you will give to us, and especially to Monica going forward. We are just so thrilled. I mean, a life-saving mission is not something to be doing just on a volunteer basis. We've got to give this the time and attention that it truly deserves. And Monica, like I said, you're the ideal person for the job. In fact, I can't think of anyone else who could possibly be our very first executive director. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you for hiring me. I'm very excited.